a disease for which these people didn't have resistance. So their armies were not able to fight. Their leaders were dying. Their entire social structure fell to its knees, and they were conquered for that reason. In the 18th century, 400,000 people in Europe died annually from smallpox, and a third of the survivors went blind, or they were left with deep pockmarked scars for the remainder of their lives. Now, China was one of the first countries that developed vaccines or inoculations for smallpox. They used a process called variolation. And when you variolate something, you used human pustules. So when someone would have smallpox, they would take the particles or the scabs. And in China, they would use a straw, and they would blow it up the nose of a person, and that person would come down with a mild case of smallpox. Now, some people with low resistance actually died from the disease, but most people would have just a mild case of the disease and then would be fairly resistant to it for a number of years, and then would have to have the inoculation again.
Well, was smallpox ever used, for military purposes on purpose? I mean, did the conquistadors know that the smallpox would wipe out the Indians?
No.
Well, they gave them blankets.
It was quite by accident when the conquistadors went. But when, as I wrote in the book, what is now the United States was being conquered, smallpox-infected blankets were given to the Native Americans as a form of biological warfare. And it succeeded, unfortunately.
Weapon of mass destruction.
Wow.
Yes.
Unbelievable. So did anybody actually discover an inoculation for smallpox that worked besides this blowing of the...
Yes, there was a farmer in England his last name was Jesty, and he experimented initially by he noticed that the milkmaids who worked on the farms would develop cowpox on their hands when the cows had cowpox, and he waited for a time when there was an infection of cowpox among the cows, and then he took the pustules and he placed it in a little incision under the skin of his wife and children. And this worked. It protected them from smallpox. And it started to be practiced sort of as folk medicine. But it wasn't until Edward Jenner came to the scene. He was a medical doctor and a member of the British Royal Academy. And he started to do experiments where he used cowpox. He had to wait again for an infection. They were fairly rare. And he took the pustules from the cows and inserted them into a number of different people, his patients, his servant's son was one. And so he did scientific experiments to see if this would work, and it did.
Well, who got to take advantage of the immunization? I mean, was it the general population? Were they invited?
No, not at that time. I just wanted to add one thing, if I may, and that is his paper would not be published. The British Royal Society refused to publish his paper because they thought it was too radical. Now, the people who got to take advantage of this were the people who could afford to pay for it. But there was a huge movement against cowpox. What happened was that the political satirists at the time, were drawing cartoons and they were writing songs about the dangers of cowpox. And in one of those cartoons that I have in the book, it showed Jenner administering the smallpox vaccine to people, and they were sprouting horns and tails and udders, and the idea was that you would take on bovine characteristics if you had the smallpox vaccine. So that really frightened people, especially the ignorant people among society. Now, there were doctors, too, who had a vested interest in carrying on variolation because they owned clinics. And in these clinics, they would inoculate wealthy people who could afford to take time off from work and stay in the clinics and the hospitals for a month or two while they went through this entire smallpox process that developed a mild case of the disease. But the disease was contagious, so they had to stay in these hospitals. The general population couldn't afford it. So smallpox was just rampant among the middle and lower classes.
But among the aristocracy, they were inoculated. They got to keep their pretty white skin, no pockmarks, no death, and so they could outlive the general populace. That's
true. That is very true. And many religious groups were opposed to Jenner's vaccination as well.
Because they didn't want to mix animals and humans. They didn't think it was right.
Yes. So
that's amazing.
It was a very difficult journey for Edward Jenner to, he had to self-publish because he couldn't have his work published. Because it was considered to be too radical. And so it was a long, slow process before smallpox was finally eradicated.
Well, Kathleen, I don't think it's gotten any better. I really don't think it's gotten any better because I noticed a warning label placed on some products people use to improve their health. It says, "These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease." And yet supplements and treatments like these that I'm reading off of are a multi-billion-dollar industry, some of them with astounding results of improvement of human health. What's going on? Have we not learned from Jenner?
No.
No,
we haven't.
So the purse strings have a vested interest in perpetuating their system, their way of doing things, and therefore are opposed to natural products and have a lot of government support behind them because they can afford to pay the lobbyists.
And they can advertise. When I was growing up, you would never think to see advertisements for drugs for people. That would be in medical journals. What was it doing in Reader's Digest?
I know. Ask your doctor about this if you want to be better,
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, and the fact that, of course, most drugs don't work for everybody, we have a double standard. The question the debunkers want to ask about UFOs are all UFOs alien spacecraft? That's silly. Of course they're not. The question should be, are any? Does this drug work for everybody? Of course not. But if it works for somebody and you're one of those people it does work for, it's probably worth using. But in other words, we don't expect drugs to be 100% effective with everybody all the time. But there are other areas, psychic phenomena and so forth. If the psychic makes a mistake once in a while, oh, that's terrible. Obviously, this doesn't work. We pay baseball players lots of money for getting a hit a third of the time.
Yes, we do. And if they can beat a third, they get really big money.
Yeah, lots and lots. But anything else, oh, no, that doesn't work all the time. That's no good.
Well, I read an article yesterday. It said a new gel being developed by French scientists may mean the end of dental fillings, and even more importantly, the dreaded dental drill. The gel, which stimulates the growth of tooth tissue, may prove a painless cure for dental decay. My question is, how long do you think it will be before we get to see this available and affordable at our family dentist?
The drill companies the drill companies will be after us.
I have a feeling it's going to say, this product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease, and we'll find it down at the local health food store.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Interesting.
And major point we're really trying to make in the book is that these crazy attitudes by the nasty, noisy negativists have consequences. It's not just a theoretical question, who won the debate, but there is an impact on people. As an example, an English inventor, Frank Whittle, developed a jet engine, got a patent for one in 1930, mind you. The British government wasn't interested. A German inventor, von Ohain, in 1936 got a patent for a jet engine. 6 years later, and yet the Germans built the first jet-powered airplane.
Sure they did.
And what if the British had developed those jets? Second World War might have been altogether different if they'd had jets up there to defend against the Wehrmacht coming to bomb them. It might have been altogether different.
I would say so.
Ideas, so there are consequences.
Well, and what we talk about, the consequence of being left on the ground or being left at a military disadvantage or being able to cure one disease or another. I mean, you and I and Kathleen, we travel quite a bit. We see the difference in one county to the next, one country to the next. If they're poor and they don't travel to meet people outside their own community, their noses, their body shapes, their hair texture is fairly common among certain demographics. How does the manipulation or discrimination between one social group, one genetic group or another, seem to fascinate governments?
You mean you got to say bad things about those guys and good things about us?
Oh, I remember my mother telling me, I was talking to Kathleen before the program, of the Better Baby contest in Kansas where my older brother was born.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Gerber was a big baby food company in those days. It was coming on, baby food. We didn't just make food off the farm. You had to buy baby food. And Gerber was sort of on the tail end of this Better Baby contest, and had to be beautiful and had to be, have a great body and great mind and all that. But this was the sort of mixed up in this whole idea of eugenics, wasn't it?
It was. And the Better Baby contest was interesting because it was part of the baby health examination movement. And children through age 4 were judged against a national standard for weight and height, and a grade A was awarded to the fittest children who received less than an A were encouraged to work to improve the child's grade for the upcoming year. And this went on pretty much before the outbreak of World War II, and it was actually connected to the eugenics movement, which also was sponsoring Fitter Families contests, and had been supported in the beginning by the American Agricultural Society Association. So the American Breeders Association, excuse me. So this was a movement that was really politicized throughout the United States, where the leaders had the intention of getting rid of the lower 10% of the families